Hey, everybody, welcome to another in our series of Flyover Future Conversations, where we have sit downs with the people having a significant impact on the innovation ecosystems in their cities and their region. For you new listeners, I'm Tom Cottingham, CEO of Flyover Media. Today, we're focused on St. Louis, and I'm pleased that we have the opportunity to sit down with Stephen Von Rump, who is currently CEO of Aegis, based in St. Louis, Aegis Digital Health. And in addition to being an accomplished entrepreneur, which Stephen will be telling us about, he's been an entrepreneur in residence at least a couple of times, serves as a panel member for National Science Foundation, has also founded other companies, at least two others that I know of. And so I can't think of anybody better than Stephen to come talk to us about what's going on in St. Louis and his journey back. And maybe that's a good place to start. If you just kind of first welcome, and nice to have you. Thanks a lot for taking
Hey,
your
Tom. Yeah,
Thursday.
thanks for having me.
If you would just start with your sort of career and geographic journey up to getting to St. Louis, because it's a fascinating one, and you've had some really interesting experiences.
Yeah, I've been all around this great big world, that's for sure. I'm an engineer by training, electrical, biomedical, software. I actually started my career in a big company, AT&T, MCI. I've lived, gosh, I've kind of lost count. One, two, three, four, five, six. I think I've lived in 6 different cities in the U.S. I've also lived in Sweden, in Germany, and I was even in Shanghai, China for a little bit. So I have been
Well, and
around quickly.
and not just all those cities, but you've lived in a lot of the hot spots. I mean, Austin, San Francisco,
Yeah.
Dallas, DC. I mean, those have been places that typically attract a lot of innovation talent, technical talent, and a lot of capital as well. So you've been in the belly of the beast, so to speak, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I got involved starting in the early 2000s. I got involved in digital health and made the jump to the entrepreneur, to the dark side, as some say,
Right.
into startups. I have founded 3 startups. I've had 3 exits. They weren't all from those 3 startups, but other early stage companies that I've been a part of. I've been a
Right.
CEO 5 times, and I really enjoy what we're doing now at Aegis Digital Health. I, the of all the places I've lived, the one place that would not be considered by many to be a hotspot for entrepreneurialism is right here in St. Louis, to be very honest about it. And we moved when I came back from Germany. We moved here in 2019, in early 2019. Had no intent to stay, just moved here temporarily for personal reasons. And I never thought, coming from the Bay Area, coming from Austin and Dallas and Boston and so on, I never thought about St. Louis as being a big entrepreneurial town. But I certainly found out very shortly after I moved here, I found out differently, enough that it was a significant factor in us deciding to stay right here in St. Louis. I was really surprised at the breadth and depth of the ecosystem here. Cortex, BioSTO, Biogenerator, which is the background here is actually the wet labs, overlooking the wet labs at Biogenerator. Much of it in health tech, life sciences, ag tech, medical devices, all things that have to do with life, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah, I've done
carbon.
I was really surprised at the breadth and depth of the ecosystem here, and it's an impressive and an exciting place to be.
So, tell us a little bit about what you do at Aegis and the team you've got there.
Yeah. So Aegis is what some call a team first concept. In other words, usually the way a startup starts is you've got one or maybe 2 people with a great idea, and they try to build a team around it.
Right.
The problem in digital health is it's very hard to do it that way, because unlike most other life science areas, or health tech areas, medical devices, pharma, biotech. You invent a new drug, you invent a new assay, a new imaging diagnostic technique, whatever it might be. The validation, the market validation is the clinical trials, it's the efficacy, it's the FDA approval. And then you go and cut a licensing deal with someone. But in digital health, where the focus is less on the technology and more on what you're doing with it, the problem you're solving, the market that you're going after, the validation in digital health is the market. And so it's difficult for an individual or a couple people who are maybe brilliant in their particular technical area, but just don't have the business acumen to be able to put a team together and take it to market. It makes it very difficult in digital health. So what we do is we were formed as a team first concept. We were formed and funded initially before we even knew what we were going to do. We ultimately ended up focusing on virtual care and remote monitoring, remote patient monitoring. And we commercialize early stage, by definition, very early stage technologies, bring them to market from inventors or founders who just would never have the resource and ability to do that on their own. We don't call ourselves a venture studio, but we have, as you can probably tell by listening, we have some of the attributes of a venture studio.
First, it sounds like a super interesting thing to be involved in. And secondly, this idea of the team first concept, I think, is so interesting. People who've listened to some of our previous interviews know that I think that's one of the missing elements, that we don't pay enough attention to surrounding that primary entrepreneur, those couple of founding entrepreneurs, often technical people, with a team that can take them through the business plan that won't work out the way it's supposed to, and navigate those waters. And it's so smart to start with a team that has the domain expertise and the experience to be able to do a much better job, I think, of moving forward than just the ad hoc entrepreneurial teams that so many people end up with.
Yeah, and I also want to say to my team, who will eventually be watching this, I'm sure, this is by far the strongest team, by far, that I've ever had the privilege to work with. And they're all based right here in St. Louis. So there was no problem finding the kind of talent that our initial investors expected us to put together in order to do what we're doing in the digital health space.
So yeah, let's come back to that. But first, just so if your team is listening, he told me this the last time we spoke. So he didn't just say that for optics. So talent is so important. One of the things I find so interesting about your sort of prodigal son story is coming back, because you went to University of Washington, right?
I went to Washington University here in St. Louis, yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we export out of flyover country fantastic talent every year to places like Austin and San Francisco and even Western Europe. And having that talent come back is critical, I think, to expanding these ecosystems. But what talent wants to do is work with other great talent. And if you find an ecosystem that is deep, more than a couple layers deep, and really has that depth of talent across the board, I mean, the amount of different skill sets required for your business that are all technical, though very different, right? So you've got to know that you're not looking for a specific kind of person. You're looking for to build teams of people, and the fact that you can do that in St. Louis is important.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, education and background in specific areas is very important, but also just smart, hardworking people are very important too. I mean, for example, our product officer, and we're predominantly a software company, at least our first product, our product officer is an MD. He's not an engineer, he's not a software developer, but he's done a fantastic job of leading that effort and getting a product on the market.
Well, he's he's the end. Well, I mean, he may not be the end user, but he's right next to the end user. So
Exactly.
that makes so much sense if you can surround them with the technical talent and the trust that's involved in that, right? Because you've got to believe, when people are talking above your pay grade about technical stuff, at some point you've got to just trust that they're making the right decisions, right?
For sure.
So
Yeah,
that
you
becomes
move too quickly in this world, especially in digital health. You move too quickly to be able to scrutinize, every decision as the CEO. You have to have a team that you can trust, and you have to let them make decisions.
and that's the other key thing, right? Get out of the way, let them do their
Yeah,
jobs,
yeah,
and that's what a great team wants, right? They want to know that they've got the trust of the CEO to make the decisions, and that everybody's heading in the same direction and has the same goals. And after that, go do what you're best at, and don't bother me about it, because you know more about it than I do, usually, right? If not always. Talk a little bit about what your alma mater's contribution to this ecosystem is, because we've been covering flyover country innovation for about 3 years now, and it's been kind of amazing to me. Now, part of it's we're paying attention, but watching St. Louis has been busting a move. It seems to us. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think so. I've never been part of a good entrepreneurial ecosystem that was not anchored by at least one major research university.
Yep.
We're fortunate to have at least two here in St. Louis, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody by leaving someone out. But
Right. All the small colleges.
Washington University and St. Louis University. Cortex, where we're situated right here, is actually in between those two campuses. And that has been a tremendous source of ideas, of product ideas, of startups, of smart people who go to work for other startups or other organizations. I can't imagine this town being what it is from an entrepreneurial perspective if not for at least those two schools. And there are other great schools that aren't that far from here either.
Right. Yeah. The region becomes really important too. I mean, capital and talent are much more fungible between, cities within flyover country than they are necessarily from the Bay Area to here, or New York to here. What about the other startups that are popping up in St. Louis? I mean, clearly with the ecosystem trucking along like it is, and what are the challenges that remain for startups? I mean, you guys are pretty far up on the learning curve in a lot of areas. I imagine capital is one.
Sure. I mean, the ecosystem is here. We've had tremendous support from BioGenerator. BioGenerator Ventures was our original investor, and we continue to get great support from them. They are a big part of the system. They are the investment arm of a larger organization called BioSTL, whose mission is very much to develop and improve the ecosystem in St. Louis. There's a tremendous focus in Cortex and particularly in BioSTL on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's been an important part because there's talent everywhere. And if you're encouraging those things, then you just have access to that much more talent. So that's been very important. I think that, and there are some great entrepreneurial support organizations here, BioGenerator, i10, both of which I've been EIR at in previous times. So I think that all the ingredients were here. I wish there was more capital. I wish there was more venture attention here. Now, is it because venture capitalists have just overlooked St. Louis up until now? Or is it because we haven't quite yet proven ourselves in terms of quality deal flow? I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both. But I will tell you, there is a lot of angel groups here that don't just call themselves investors, but actually do deals. Actually invest money.
Right.
There are some great angel groups here. Missouri Technology Corporation is a fund funded by the state of Missouri that will provide matching investment to other investors. So there are resources like that around. There's some great grant organizations around here. All of our investments so far has come from angels, except for Biogenerator itself. So that's there. But you can't sit around and complain that there's not enough money. You've got to, if you've got a great business and you know how to execute, you got to go find the money, and you will. And if it's
Yeah,
not,
and
then so be it.
well, and I think it's gotten, pandemic changed obviously a lot of things. And I think it really, I mean, back when you were in the Bay Area and when I was doing a lot of work in the Bay Area, um, Sand Hill Road guys weren't going to invest in a company that was more than about a 17-minute drive from their office, right? I mean, they
Yeah,
just weren't.
yeah. We used to say they won't
Proximity.
invest in a company that's any longer than their how far they can extend their hand to grab you around the neck. And I
Oh,
raised a lot of money in Silicon Valley when I lived there with the startup I was working at the time, so I know what it's like.
well, it made a ton of sense. Proximity really mattered back then. But I think what people have realized is that proximity doesn't necessarily always matter.
Mhm.
Um, because of obviously of Zoom and stuff. And B, I think this idea of the corporate headquarters, one monolithic headquarters, is being deconstructed a bit as
Mhm.
companies start to look at hubs. Um, and so the VCs, even from an operational standpoint, are going to be geographically dispersed more and more. I mean, you may have C-suite in the Bay Area, but the marketing team and your legal IP people and those guys may be anywhere. I mean, one of the law firms in Louisville, Kentucky does a ton of IP work for Google,
Mhm.
Meta. Um, so yeah, I think that's improving the availability of capital to move from the coast to the Midwest. And then we're seeing, more and more, I call them VC 3.0, pop up in flyover country that are not necessarily exclusively, but pay a lot of attention to what's going on there.
Yeah.
And then as we talk about capital and improving access to capital and investment, let's talk a little bit about NSF
Mhm.
and what they're doing. They have, I know through the CHIPS Act and some other things, a lot of capital available. You've been involved with
Mhm.
them for quite a while. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I sit on a panel at NSF. In fact, on the digital health panel. I've also done some ad hoc for NIH as well. Both of them have great programs for funding young companies. The SBIR program, the STTR program, phase one programs that are both phase one that are predominantly focused on developing the idea and the technology, and then phase two grants that are focused more on the commercialization, addressing the rest of the technical holes and then actually developing a commercial product. So there's a lot of money to be had there. It's very competitive, and it's competitive on a national level. So you've got to be good. You've got to have a great idea, and you've got to you have to have strong innovation, as NIH uses that word. NSF uses the word or the phrase intellectual merit, but you have to have that. But that money is available, and this town, both at the business level, the startup companies, as well as at the academic level, particularly Washington University. This town brings in hundreds of millions of dollars per year in grant money from those organizations.
Yeah, and I think that for the entrepreneurs listening, it is something like you said. It's very competitive, and sometimes the time cycle is really long. Um, but there's non-dilutive grant money out there, as you said, for companies that have intellectual merit and a great idea. And I would encourage folks, if you're looking for capital, and it doesn't have to be hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mean, a lot of companies, especially in the biotech space or any IP that comes out of a university, don't necessarily require millions of dollars to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it depends on the field that you're in. Medical
Sure.
devices can be very expensive. Pharma certainly can be very expensive, but digital health, you can usually get to market for less than $1 million in digital health. That may not get you home. And you know, a typical phase one NSF NIH grant is about $250,000. That's a lot of money to a young company.
It's a ton, yeah.
To get
Right.
by, and a phase two grant is $1 million and up. So it's, you know, that's substantial funding for a small company.
Yeah. Yeah. So those of you looking for money, that's a place to check. So what is next in the future of Aegis? What are you guys focusing on now, and what are you looking at for the next, you know, couple of years?
We're in the process of launching our first product. It's still in stealth mode, so I don't want to say too much about it, but I will tell you that it is a remote monitoring and support platform for practices who treat diabetes patients. So that's what
Huge
we're up
market
to now. Yeah, huge opportunity. We have, you know, we have several practices up and running now. We'll be going public with this, I guess, if you will, pretty soon. So that's what's going on. And we already are thinking of a pipeline of other products that all have in common that they're about virtual care and remote monitoring, but address different clinical conditions.
Huh. So if you have a non-invasive product that's an IoT device, does it require any kind of federal FDA or any kind of approval? How does that work?
Usually not in digital health. Usually not. Now, if you are actually participating in the diagnostic aspect of the practice, you know, and the flow from the practitioner, the physician or other practitioner, you know, to the patient. If you're doing something that's participating in a diagnosis, that could be a different story that may lead you to define your product as a software as a medical device. And that could lead you to a class 2, you know, classification and the approval that you would need from the FDA. But, you know, the de novo and pre-market authorization class 3 devices, you know, a completely novel invasive medical device, or obviously
that's totally right.
Novel drug, you know, that's a long road. And one thing I like about digital health is that we don't have to do that. We can move much faster, get to market faster, and then maybe add enhancements later that make it that, you know, that cause it to require FDA approval down the road. But get into the market as quick as you can.
Which I think is great advice for a lot of entrepreneurs, right? You don't need to have all the bells and whistles to get out there and learn if the market is going to embrace your product. You can add those later. And you know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Very much so. You know, as an EIR, I've worked with dozens of startup companies, and the two most common mistakes that I see them made, and I've made both of these mistakes myself, you know, previously in my career. Number one, they don't do enough customer discovery. It's easy to say that you've done customer discovery, but it's hard to do right. And a lot of startups, you know, you ask them, have you done your customer discovery? And they say, oh, of course, you know, well, what did you do? Well, we presented our product to, you know, 20 different potential customers, and they all said it was great. Well, that's not customer discovery, you know.
Well, and if you're the entrepreneur,
in real customer discovery, you have 10, 20 or more interviews with customers before you ever even talk about your product, just understanding what they're dealing with and what the problem is. That's real customer discovery. That's hard to do well. And then the second thing is, you know, not understanding what your MVP really is, and usually erring on the far side. In other words, trying to build too much into your product before you take it to market, and that, you know, as you just said, you know, that goes against the idea of speed. Build something that addresses the need, that's an MVP, but no more. Get it in, and you'll learn the rest as you go.
I agree totally, and I think that being an entrepreneur myself and having, you know, gone through several different companies, it's hard for the entrepreneur, if you're a product-based company, to hear any criticism, right? And so I think it gets back to your thought about, it really is something you need to learn how to do. Interestingly enough, this is a perfect tee up for what will probably be our next conversation, which is we were speaking with University of Akron, Ohio, and they have a very specific program for training entrepreneurs to go out and get really valid customer feedback. It's a form, it's not a conversation. They have other people there. So if when the entrepreneur starts arguing and says, "What do you mean you don't like this? It's the best,"
Yeah. I strongly encourage, that's a great point, Tom. I strongly encourage entrepreneurs, if they haven't already had this training, to go get that formal training. NSF has a great program called I-Corps that is sponsored yeah, I guess you could say sponsored by various academic institutions. St. Louis University, right here in St. Louis, has a great I-Corps program.
Are they part of it? Because that's
Missouri Technology University in Rolla, Missouri, has a great program. University of Illinois has such a great program. Take the time to go through that program. It doesn't take long. It takes weeks, not months or years. Right. Take the time to go through that program, do your homework, learn how to do it right. Because if you build that foundation, you've got a much better chance of success.
Yeah, and in fact,
get to product market fit a lot faster.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to get great feedback, and you need to pay attention to it. The Akron program is the I-Corps program, and it's and they're part of the Great Lakes region,
right,
which is a great way to look at flyover country. Right, in that region you've got University of Chicago, Michigan State, Akron, right? I mean, so it's this really interesting group of universities, many of whom are internationally known for what they do. And so, so if you're a budding entrepreneur, do check out that I-Corps program. There's 2 of them. Take the first one, and it will be time well spent. It's a super important thing.
Absolutely. It will save you time and money, and possibly the success, the survival of your company, if you do it right.
Well, so many times, especially with technology, the window's not going to stay open for very long. If you miss that opportunity, you may have really missed that opportunity by screwing around and trying to add more bells and whistles and not getting out and squishing your toes in the mud, as they used to say, with customers.
Exactly. Yeah, and just because a customer asks for a feature you don't have doesn't mean that you don't have an MVP, that you don't have a viable product in the market. And again, if you've laid the right foundation with that customer discovery, you'll know that, and you won't panic when a customer asks you for a feature you don't have. You'll know how to work around it. You'll know how to sell around it and get them in the game, get yourself in the game, come back and fix it later.
Right. Totally agree. Okay, final thing. How do you get your deal flow? I mean, your idea flow, your IP. How are you picking what to bring into the venture studio?
Well, that's the easy part, because there's just so much technology, so many smart people out there. We have talked to organizations in universities, for the most part, around the Midwest, Mizzou, U of I, Northwestern, where else? And then some on the coast as well, but a lot of it within the Midwest. And we're well enough known. I wouldn't say we're super well known in St. Louis, but we're certainly well enough known that if somebody has an idea, but they're looking for that kind of support, somebody that can bring it to market for them, they know who we are, or they know how to find us. So actually, for us, deal flow in the sense of finding great ideas, whether they're coming from academia or whether they're coming from industry, that's the easy part. The hard part is sorting out which ones are the real winners.
It always is, isn't it? Well, you've got a lot of experience doing that, and you've got a pretty good track record. So I would put my money on the ones you guys pick for sure.
Well, I hope so. Thank you.
And good luck with the launch. I look forward to seeing what else comes your way. And next time I'm in St. Louis, I'll bring my guitar, and
Yeah, that sounds good.
We'll play a little.
And you know, also, well, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Um, oh yeah, I look forward to the day when you have to change the name of your organization because it's no longer Flyover.
Yeah, I hear you. No, for our audience, the first time Steve and I talked, he said, "I don't like the name Flyover," and which we get. We've kind of embraced it, but yes, I hope it becomes Destination Future, right?
Yes, something like that.
Well, the demographics, I mean, the shift in populations would tell you there is something
Yeah,
afoot for
yeah.
sure.
But what you're doing, what you guys are doing, Tom, is super important, and I'm just glad to be a part of it, in some small way, and I hope that you keep it up. And I
We will.
think that we being the Midwest have a lot of momentum going our way.
I do too, and thanks to people like you. So thanks a lot, man. It's been great. I look
Yeah,
forward
thanks again for
to
having me. It's been fun.
continuing the conversation. Thanks a
All
lot, and
right,
thank all of you
let's
for
go make some success in the market.
absolutely. All right, thanks everybody for listening, and I think our next conversation will be talking about customer discovery. So be sure to tune in. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.